Hello, everyone. Welcome to the CPPR dialogue on strengthening state responses to gender-based violence, US and Indian perspectives. This webinar is an official launch of our research project titled Strengthening Institutional Mechanisms Combating Gender-Based Violence, supported by USCG Chennai under the Public Diplomacy Grants Program. We selected November 25th as the day for the webinar for an obvious reason. The webinar is to commemorate the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, the annual campaign starting today. CPPR, in collaboration with the United States Consulate General, Chennai, is conducting this webinar to analyze the legal, institutional, and policy aspects of the existing institutional mechanisms combating GBV in India. We will also delve into understanding some of the best practices in the US that are fighting GBV, both at the regulatory and institutional levels. In India, the legal framework is extensive with progressive laws such as the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005, Prevention of Sexual Harassment at the Workplace Act (POSH), Criminal Law Amendment 2013, and the latest Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita 2023. The laws have instituted mechanisms like Women's Protection Officer under the DV Act, Internal Complaints Committee under POSH, Dowry Prohibition Officer under Dowry Act, and many more. Further, the central and state governments have brought out schemes such as the one-stop centers, shelter homes, women's helpline, and safety apps. Some states have developed specific localized initiatives such as the Snehita and the Cyber Dome in Kerala, Bharosa centers in Telangana, Mahila Shakti Salah Kendras in Rajasthan, and systems to combat sex trafficking in Goa. However, several challenges persist in implementation due to challenges like limited resources, low awareness, social stigma, a lack of gender sensitization, and inconsistent support from law enforcement. For studying such gaps and challenges in order to ideate and develop policy interventions for strengthening existing social and legal institutions combating GBV in India, as already mentioned, CPPR, in collaboration with USCG Chennai, is conducting a research project titled Strengthening Institutional Mechanisms Combating Gender-Based Violence. This is a public diplomacy grant by USCG Chennai. This national level project studies the status of existing institutions in India, operations of one-stop centers, use of technological platforms to combat GBV, the gaps and challenges faced by such institutions, and best practices from the US. Further, we will be conducting GBV workshops in each of the states to provide a platform for sharing insights, lessons learned, and fostering collaboration among all government and non-government stakeholders to enhance collective efforts against GBV. Based on the research study and stakeholder interactions, we will be submitting our reports to the governments of the 5 states that we have selected, namely Kerala, Telangana, Goa, Bihar, and Rajasthan. Today's discussion will delve into the efficacy of such institutional mechanisms in India and the US and potential solutions to bolster such initiatives from social, cultural, and legal aspects for combating GBV. Before getting into the conversation, we have with us Ms. Jean Briganti, who is the Public Affairs Officer of the US Consulate General, Chennai. She took charge in August 2024. She has over 2 decades of service and most recently served as Public Diplomacy Officer for Public Engagement in Warsaw, where she had previous tours as spokesperson and Deputy Cultural Officer. She is here with us today to share her remarks on the project and the topic of discussion with us. I extend a hearty welcome to you, Ms. Jean.
Thank you so much, Eliza, and thank you so much to all of you for joining us this evening and for some of you this morning. I think it speaks volumes that we're having this conversation today, and would note that these are conversations as we begin the 16 days that are being held not just here in India and the United States, but throughout the world. And I think the reason it's very clear, the reason why these discussions have to be had. In one way, it's extremely sad that these are conversations that are necessary, but I think it's also a reflection of the priority that not just we in the United States or we as the United States government are placing on this as an issue that has to be addressed, on the challenges that are still being faced by women in their communities, in their workplaces, at the institutional level. The discussion that you're going to have here, you're going to have access to subject matter expertise spanning decades that have seen certainly change, but not nearly enough. So this will be a frank discussion. It'll be a discussion that will look at where progress has happened so far. What are some of the major challenges, and hopefully ways that we can work together in partnership to affect some of those challenges. On that note, on partnership, just wanted to, from the start, thank our partners at CPPR. I think one of the things that we, as the Department of State and our embassies and consulates throughout the world, say and see, and as I've seen in my service for over 2 decades, nothing that we do is possible without partnership. I think we can be working toward the same goal, and the impact will never be as strong, as long lasting, and really get to the issues and get to that understanding of the audiences if we did not have partners. And I think the partners, and in this case, the experts who are bringing their perspective that they've built upon both in the United States, in India, in various places in India, will really have a wealth of experience to draw upon, and that frankness and candor and recommendations for how we can move ahead. So I don't want to take up any more time because there's a lot of discussion and a lot of expertise that we will leverage upon, and we take this time and remember the reasons why we have to have that conversation and commit to that and commit to that activism. So with that, I wanted to thank you all for joining. A special thanks to our partners, a special thanks to our panelists for giving of yourselves and your time, and very much look forward to the discussion. Eliza, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jean. Before we begin our discussion, let me introduce our panelists for the day. Ms. Flavia Agnes. She's a legal scholar and women's rights lawyer, a pioneer of the women's movement. She has worked consistently for over 4 decades on issues of violence against women. As co founder of Majlis, which provides quality legal services to women and children, she has helped to secure the rights of thousands of battered women in Mumbai, as well as across Maharashtra. Her widely published writings have provided a vital context for feminist jurisprudence, human rights law, and gender studies in India. Welcome, Flavia.
Thank you so much, Eliza.
Ms. Shamita Das Dasgupta. She is a co founder of Manvi, the first organization to focus on violence against South Asian women in the US. She has taught psychology, gender studies, and law at Rutgers University and New York University, authored 5 books, written several academic papers and monographs, and conducts training for domestic violence and sexual violence practitioners in the US and India. Currently, she works with the Kolkata Foundation, a US based organization that fights poverty and gender violence in West Bengal, India. Welcome, Shamita. Ms. Nandita Barua. She is the Asia Foundation's country representative for India. She has over 35 years of experience working on human trafficking, gender, labor migration, and human rights in South and Southeast Asia. She has previously worked with CIDA, UN Women, and USAID. Nandita has worked to support national governments and civil society partners to design and deliver programs that effectively address the core socio-economic and political dimension of development through a rights-based and gender equitable framework. Welcome, Nandita.
Thank you so much, Eliza.
I'm sure that we'll have an engaging discussion ahead. I would like to remind our viewers that you can put your questions in the YouTube comment box, which we will be taking up towards the end of the session. I welcome the moderator of the session today, Ms. Anu Maria Francis, Senior Associate, Research and Project Management.
Thank you, Eliza. Hi, welcome all. So as Eliza has already given a very detailed introduction on the topic, I think we can get into the important conversation of the day. So I think we'll start with Advocate Flavia Agnes. So Ms. Flavia, being a women rights lawyer and fighting for women for the past 33 years, I think I would like to know your initial thoughts on how the legal justice delivery and the institutions in India are helping women fighting gender-based violence. Like, do you think that are the laws enough? What are the major gaps in the existing systems? How do you see it?
Thank you very much for inviting me on this very auspicious day and a very prestigious panel. I think the issues that you have taken up are very relevant for the day, and the theme is very relevant, and your work in this area is very important. I'll speak very briefly on the work that my organization, Madlis, does, and that will help you to find out the gaps. What are they in the system? To answer your first question, according to me, we have enough laws. I don't think we need more laws because every time something happens, we always turn to the legal system to find innovations and to bring in more laws, etc. And there is a presumption here that if laws change, laws become better, there will be justice. Women will get justice. But what we have failed to grapple is that unless the procedures become friendly towards women, the laws that are enacted do not reach women. And it is this gap that Madlis tries to fill in, particularly on gender-based violence and sexual abuse of women and children. Now, we have very good law for protecting women from sexual violence, which was brought in 2012, and I think that's very important. But we have to understand the legal system in which it is located, which with the criminal legal system is very daunting. It's very frightening. And though the law prescribes women-friendly courtrooms, women-friendly judges, women-friendly prosecutors, etc., when you actually go down to the brass tacks, you find an extremely formal setup. And there's very little help for the victims to depose in the court, with the result that if they don't meet the very high standard of proving an offense, the case gets acquitted, and then they are termed as liars. The children who come before the court, the women who come before the court, then become liars, and they face extreme stigma. And we have very high acquittal rate. Conviction rate is as low as 26-27%. The same in the US also, very low conviction rates. And our endeavor has been to improve this conviction rate by helping the survivor negotiate the system, teaching her what is expected, the meaning of FIR, its relevance during the trial, what kind of questions will be asked to her, and how she should respond, etc. And with that, in the cases that we have taken up, We are a very small drop in the ocean. I must emphasize that. We're not a very huge organization, and our work is very local and it's very limiting because it is very taxing, it is time consuming, etc. But the cases where we have taken up, the conversion rate is as high as 68-70%. Because we're able to teach the survivor how to negotiate the system, be with her during the deposition, get appointed as support persons so that we have a status in the court and help her to negotiate this system. And I think this is the major gap that we have in our system, that we do not have this kind of support everywhere. It's not institutionalized. It's just a small private intervention, but I think it has got great possibilities, and we need to step up, and we must make this as a government program.
Thank you, Flavia, for that initial remarks. And I completely agree with you. I think Telangana's actually tried for this through their Bharosa program, where they're trying to support the victims, or rather say survivors, to go through the legal system, the issues in the legal system. Like, they make them familiarized with this, and also they give support services for the survivors. So yeah, I completely agree with you. I think we need to institutionalize such systems. So thank you, Flavia, for that initial remarks. I think we'll move on to Ms. Shamita. Shamita ma'am, I know you are from India, but being someone living in US for past many years and working for the South Asian women community in US, I'm sure you will also have probably a different experience of working with institutional mechanisms and legal systems in US. So I think I would like to hear your thoughts on the same.
Thank you, Anu. And I thank all the co-panelists and CPPR, and also the consulate, Chennai consulate, US consulate, for this wonderful panel and wonderful discussion. I'm hoping to learn a lot from everyone. Thank you. Well, one of the things that the US has done, it's not so different from India's progress and India's development of the laws, because up to the 1970s and early 80s, domestic violence was assumed to be something that should be tackled in the house, in the homes, and not in the institutions. Just to give you a little bit of background on this, that in, I think, the 1985, a young woman in Connecticut sued the local police office very, very successfully. And the idea was that not the idea, but what she sued was, she said that the case is known as the Thurman versus City of Torrington in Connecticut. Tracy Thurman successfully sued the police department of the area for failure to provide equal protection under the law. That was her abuser, and her husband basically assaulted her in a brutal way in front of the police. And she had been calling the police many, many times, and they hadn't been responsive. In 1986, because she was so successful and she got a huge compensation from the police, there was a law passed that the police departments actually could not tackle or endure this kind of compensation, giving compensation to survivors. So it passed as the Thurman Law in Connecticut in 86, the Family Violence Prevention and Response Act. And this actually spread all over the US, this kind of police department becoming more careful, getting more training, how to deal with not South Asian, but all survivors of violence. And this was also something important. This was the start of the beginning of the mandatory arrest policy. I believe there are three policies and laws that are very important in being support to survivors of violence. One is, of course, I think India has it also through PWDVA, which is the restraining order, or it's called order of protection, at different places. Or the restraining order was passed in the late 1970s in almost all 50 states in the US accepted it and actually enacted this law. And then in the, I would say the 80s, after the Torrington, the Thurman law, mandatory arrest policy was enacted, but not all. Remember that the US is very much based on state laws. So not all states have enacted such a law, but a lot have. And there are some that actually have what's called, some of them have passed what's called pro-arrest policies. So it's not necessarily mandatory, but pro-arrest, that they would be more likely to arrest. Whereas mandatory, the discretion from the police officers who show up at the scene is taken away completely. You have to arrest someone who's harming. And if you see that both are harming, you can arrest both of them. That's the one other policy I think is very, very important. And there is another one which came about around the mid-1990s, which is called the no-drop prosecution, and which is even when the survivor is reluctant to go through the prosecution of the abuser, it can be an evidence-based prosecution. That is, the state takes on, like in murder cases and things, the state takes on the onus of prosecuting the perpetrator. And it came about because victims often drop charges, and because after the immediate crisis is over, they just cannot take this on for a very long time, or they don't want to cooperate with the prosecution because of various reasons. I'm not going to say that they are to be blamed at all. So this came about that there would be evidence-based prosecution. So these three institutional changes have been vital for women. And the South Asian women also have really benefited from all of these, South Asian immigrant women who are here. But there are also issues, I'm sure we'll get to that. There are issues and problems with these. There are many other smaller changes that are there, but I think these three particularly are very, very important in support of survivors.
Thank you, ma'am, for throwing light on the existing systems and some of the best practices that you have in the institutional level in US. I think I'll go to the next speaker, Ms. Nandita. So, Ms. Nandita, as you have extensively worked on issues of human trafficking and GBV in South and Southeast Asian countries, could you share some insights on how institutional mechanisms work in probably India, Bangladesh, and Nepal? Because I think you have worked on Nepal and Bangladesh as well. So what is your take on these existing mechanisms? Do you think are they good enough, or probably how we can improve the existing system?
Thank you, Anna Maria, and thank you CPPR and the US Consulate for actually hosting this conversation. And it's been very engaging to listen to both Shamita and Flavia. I think similarities from what the others have said about issues of gender-based violence in the domain of the home versus whether it's trafficking. First, I think while anti-trafficking laws are stringently set up across every country, the biggest challenge becomes at two levels, because trafficking is happening both. I think one thing to understand, both internally and cross-border. So we cannot really look at that there is cross-border trafficking and there's no internal trafficking. In fact, they are very, very correlated. Most of the time, a victim gets trafficked first within the country, from their place of residence to, say, another place of servitude, and then gets further trafficked across border. Um, so understanding that link between trafficking internal and not and external, and not really segregating the two, is very important. Second thing, I think when we look at institutional mechanisms, India has actually done very well on anti-trafficking. We have set up the AHTUs, the anti-trafficking units. Extensive training and work has happened. People like Flavia has also played a massive role, and other women's movement groups, in trying to really focus more on trafficking of women and children. It started largely with in the arena of sex trafficking, but today we know that it encompasses a lot many more sites into which women get trafficked. Women and children both get trafficked. So I think if I'm looking at whether we have legal frameworks in place, there have been changes to the law. There's been an attempt to really look at the whole issue of solicitation versus trafficking, penalizing the victim of trafficking versus those who are perpetrators. And all those processes have gone through a long historical discussion, discourse, women movement leading it, and changes have happened. But where I think the problem is the ability. One, the fact is, the moment it becomes trafficking, a case is seen as a trafficking. First is establishing the fact that it was trafficking, and in most places that becomes an almost daunting task, because rarely is a child or a woman physically abducted, rarely to be trafficked. Not that it doesn't happen. You are usually lured, and the word is you are lured. You are told, I'm finding your job. You're lured to say, I'm getting you married. You're lured to say, I'll give you better opportunities. You're lured to say, send your child with me, here are 20,000. Let's he or she will be sending back X amount of money to you. So I think when we then look at the word lured, the strategy behind the lurement does not get well captured in the legal arena of when you're fighting the case. Especially if the person is not a minor, it becomes even more difficult. And we know that trafficking happens both for minor and major. It's 18 plus and 18 below, and men and women and children, boys and girls equally. The other thing is, the moment it becomes cross-boundary, jurisdiction issues come in place. Where is the person from? Is he from Nepal? Should the BSF be involved in it? Is it the responsibility of the Shasastra Seema Bal or the Border Security Force? Who do you hand it over? What are protocols? I think for years, organizations and institutions have been demanding to address cross-border trafficking, a more better, well-stated protocol on how to deal with this case when it becomes an issue of legality between two countries, right? And then saying, what should it be? Should the person be indicted in the country where the person is captured, or should the process really go beyond, and there should be cooperation in the country of origin from where the person was lured, and where the perpetrators probably are, or at least, and maybe with or without the person that they are taking across the border, whose jurisdiction? Those are still not very well set up. We have done enough SOPs between India, Nepal, India, Bangladesh, but applying that at the level of state institutions remains a challenge. The other critical factor, of course, is trafficking is not a standalone abuse that's happening. In a lot of cases of trafficking, there has been a persistent history of abuse and violence in the families and the homes that the children are coming on. So there is that issue. So the first encounter or the first instances of violence and abuse do not get addressed as violence and abuse. And then it becomes easier to get it into the second and the third level of violence and abuse through trafficking, or to putting them into sweatshops, or, you name it. So I think while mechanisms at home, I would say, I think there's been more stringent, but there are still multiple cases every time we hear on domestic abuse being, for domestic work, abuse of girls from various parts of India being something which is organized in such a way that agencies which are licensed to provide domestic workers are abusing girls and women. So I think oversight of what is the state enabling, because you think, oh, okay, at least as domestic work, we need to empower them to find a job somewhere. Maybe, agreed. But is the circumstances enabling them to do that appropriately looked into? Are the institutional mechanisms looked into? Where is the oversight? There is a gap there. And I think the other thing that probably is just not been very well adequately addressed is, we've done a lot of training on awareness for police officers, for frontline officials, SOPs between the agencies. The other day we were doing a training in the state of Bihar for certain security agencies, and I think the challenge was, what's the protocol if the person is arrested, or can the person, if you believe somebody is a perpetrator, can the border security guys or the Shasastra Seema Bal arrest them? And if they do, who do they hand it over to? What's the local police's role? Is there a systematic protocol to do that? When do you bring in the anti-human trafficking unit into the play? What is the role? What's the accessibility of these units from the border to wherever the units are placed? So, there are a lot of structural things that needs to be streamlined further in this issue. And the case is the same, whether you say India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, it's not any different, frankly. And very easy to, duck the bullet by saying, is this really trafficking, or should I just get over this and say illegal migration and push the person back? That's been a standard procedure that has happened also across the border. Illegal migrant had just, so they are illegal migrant, just push them back, especially if it's adult women, and most of the time women with other, and age becomes a difficult issue to verify, or it's men. So I think these are issues that require much deeper state to state engagement, government to government engagement, to come to an understanding on how these cases are to be investigated, navigated, responded to, and then further action between the different states. I think currently, I feel on cross border, we tend to be a little bit more, unsure on these challenges, I think. Internal trafficking, yes, I think we're probably much better placed today to at least identify and prosecute. But again, hostility of victims become a common issue. Access to compensations become issue, and Flavia probably knows more about this than I do. Even in terms of getting witness testimony, that those become very problematic, because they are arrested or caught in a place far away from their homes most of the time, or at least some distance away from their home. And then traceability becomes issue. So these would require much more stringent protocols than we have currently.
Thank you, Nandita. So I think your conversation actually took me to, we had recently, we got an opportunity to attend an international consultation on sex trafficking in Goa. So there also, I think the issues were very similar, in the sense that they were also talking about how difficult it is to get the witness testimonies to testify in the court, to get people to testify for them in the court. So that whole process is difficult. But one thing which I noticed from all this stakeholder consultations and conversations was that actually NGOs, I mean, the civil society, do play a very, very, very big role when it comes to these kind of issues. Because the state institutions often fail when it comes to implementation, but NGOs, the collaboration with NGOs is actually helping them a lot in this respect. The same is the case with Telangana also. Telangana also, I think the NGOs are quite strong. I mean, most of the state schemes are implemented in collaboration with the states, with the NGOs. So I think with that, I'll come to the second set of questions. Like, since all of you have worked, I mean, the panelists, they've worked in NGOs or have collaborated with NGOs on this work. And we have Flavia, who have Majlis, and Manvi. So Shamita with Manvi. So I would like to know how effective is bringing civil society, how effective is civil society taking this up forward. So Flavia, Majlis has been a legal resource center and an NGO. And how do you think the collaboration with NGOs could help complement the government's efforts in combating TB? How we can probably bring in more civil society organizations into the existing institutional framework? Is that a solution forward?
We have two, like broadly, the NGOs can be categorized at two levels. The one working with the community, creating awareness, providing individual support, etc. And the other working with state agencies and helping the judicial process or even other processes. And Majlis comes in the category of working with stakeholders, the judiciary, the executive, etc. And we feel that is a very important intervention. Here in our work, legal knowledge is very essential. And you have to understand the court system, how actually it pans out, and thereby collaborating with the police, collaborating with the judges, conducting trainings, etc., are very, very crucial, according to me, particularly while dealing with sexual and domestic violence. Because our understanding of sexual and domestic violence is very limited, though the definition given in law is very broad, but it is not filtering down on the ground. So we need to create a lot of awareness, because no matter how much work you do on your own, unless it is reflects in state actions, it is very minimal value. To make it effective, the state must act as per the laws that have been enacted. And if this doesn't happen, you providing that, intervening, stepping in, filling that lacuna does not actually help out. This is what we have realized, and our work is geared up to creating this awareness at a very broad level and at multiple levels. And only there we can see some results. But it's a huge task. I'm not saying it's easy, but we need to work here with other NGOs as well as with state agencies. You cannot work in a vacuum. Your work has to be linked to the community and linked to the stakeholders. And particularly if you're working with the survivors, you need to be in tune with their aspirations, with their needs, with the reality of their lives, and then evolve strategies that will help them. And each individual strategy is different. Each one you have to fine tune it according to that particular survivor's needs, her ability, her capacity, her motivation, etc. And only thereby you can provide some kind of help. So I really believe that providing this kind of support is very, very important for the survivor.
So, Flavia, I mean, I have a supplementary question to what you were saying. Like, we already have this State Legal Services Authority and District Legal Services Authority, which is providing legal aid and all these kind of services. How do you see their services? Like, is it like a complement? I mean, whether Majlis is doing a work which is complementary to what they're doing, or how is it? I mean, are they working good enough?
The state legal aid commission and organizations are very limited in their work, and the help that they provide is not sufficient, and their understanding is also very narrow. And the panel lawyers are actually, at least that's what's happening in Maharashtra, in Mumbai in particular, that the lawyers on the panel are not astute lawyers, not successful lawyers. And that's why they come under the committee, because they don't have enough litigation. And that's a sad state of and the legal aid panel lawyers also get paid very, very little. It's a very sad situation, though the intention was very good to provide this and have state level agencies with a high court judge in charge of the entire state, with every district judge at the district level, a district judge in charge at the taluka level. It's a whole system that has been created, but it's not working satisfactorily. We need to gear that up. We don't work closely with them. We conduct trainings, etc. for them. But I agree with you that unless this system starts working, our interventions will be very limited.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, Flavia. So since we're talking about NGO collaboration, how effectively civil societies can play a role. Now. Sure, ma'am. Thank you for joining us.
Okay. Thank you.
And thank you for that insights.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
You can go ahead.
Yeah. So my next question, I mean, I would like to ask, you, Shamita, since US government extensively collaborate with civil society organizations on different fronts, so how effective is the system there? Do you think that NGO or the civil society or decentralizing the institutions can help in compacting GBV, at least in India, with your US experience? What do you think?
Well, the best is what Flavia said. I mean, I agree with everything that she said. It's very important to hear. And of course, Nandita is there with her vast experience in collaborating. So I'm not going to be any different than this, but for civil society or non-governmental organizations, so to speak, NGOs to come in, and we call them community-based organizations in the US, to be collaborating with institutions is extraordinarily important. And to a certain degree, well, to a large degree, it has been acknowledged by the passing of the Violence Against Women Act in 1994 and its subsequent endorsements. So there is a lot of support in various ways, and the non-governmental actors have actually influenced the writing of the Violence Against Women Act, etc. But it also, the Act has provided sources of funding for non-governmental organizations, and it is assumed that these organizations are doing extraordinarily important work in the communities. Now, I talked to you about the policies that are important, the restraining order, the mandatory arrest, the evidence-based prosecution. All of these are really important and well-meaning and positive steps, no doubt. But they also have certain drawbacks, because it starts with, all of these start with the assumption that police will intervene. The law enforcement is going to come in and intervene. And with special communities, certain communities in the US that have had historically difficult relationships with the law enforcement, and legal systems, the Black community, the First Nation community, immigrant communities such as the South Asians, Latinos, all of these communities are reluctant to actually call in law enforcement. Well, sometimes it's, the women only want this abuse that is happening right now to stop. And the only way they know how to do it is law enforcement, calling 911. But after they call 911, a whole slew of institutional responses is unleashed. And many of them don't want that at that point. The community gets really upset with them because there are consequences to all of these things, and the law enforcement intervening. So what we do find is the community-based organizations, the CBOs, actually play an extremely important role in supporting the women if they want to go through the legal system, or if they don't want to go to legal system. Both ways, they support the survivors in ways that that cannot be done with just the institutions being there. So in that sense, I was a part of forming Manavi, which is just because of that, because women did not want to go through a legal intervention. Women did not want to go through law enforcement coming into their homes. So Manavi was there to take up that gap, to help women either to understand that they can be supported by legal institutions. Maybe that's the last resource they have there, an important resource. But if they don't want to go through it, even then, how can we provide, help her get justice and safety, which are actually the crux of GBV, right? To be safe and to provide justice to the person who has been wronged. So I think community-based agencies are vital in this work that we are doing. And I'm sure in India, as you see, both the speakers before me spoke about that, addressed that issue. But it's important to recognize that, as Flavia, I think, said, that CBOs not just support women, but they also support the institutions. That we provide training, we provide legal advocates who go in, we provide special testimonies. We have, I personally have worked, I'm considered to be a cultural expert, therefore testify, I become a witness in court all the time. So it's important to recognize that and to know that, it's vital.
Thank you, ma'am, for that comments. So coming to Nandita, ma'am, so what are your experiences like? What do you think about decentralizing such initiatives for compacting GBV? I can't hear you, ma'am.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Right. So I think two things. One, agree with both the speakers and definitely with what Chamita said, that civil society or non-governmental organizations, CSOs, CBOs, are absolutely critical to addressing any issues which have a deep-rooted social bias in that. Gender-based violence, as we all know, the core issue is the whole construct of patriarchy and culture and social norms that gets played out in different countries. Different countries differently, but the outcome being violence for women, the marginalized, the less protected, the less powerful. And I think when you look at something like that, the state apparatus and the state machinery has a role, but I don't think that it can function without the support of the non-state players. First and foremost, non-state players, if you're looking at the absolute community base, they are the ones who can actually provide you the intelligence and the information about the community in which any form of aggression, violence is happening, whether in a collective or in an individual form. And that information and intelligence becomes very critical for state authorities to be able to act upon and take that knowledge. Second, they provide the knowledge through their research, through works like CPPR is doing, which in turn informs policies and law. Third, they are there to provide the support for the victims. While state institutions are critical for supporting victims, state institutions, as we know, especially in largely in Southeast Asia, resource being an issue, knowledge and capacity being an issue, human resource being an issue, need the support of civil society organizations or CBOs to be that protective space for the victims or the survivors, depending on where we place the person at that point. And I think there is where the link and coordination the civil society play between different stakeholders who actually come in as critical state partners when you have a gender-based violence case. It's the judiciary, it's the police, it's the healthcare, the medical professional, the psychosocial caregiver. The link and the thread between these with the victim at the center is just that non-state player. That's the player that plays the most critical role in ensuring that there is a coordinated approach to all of these different stakeholders who are going to hugely influence the life moving forward for this victim. And that's where the CBOs come in. And I think you cannot underline in any way, you cannot undermine the importance of that. I don't really get when you say decentralized, because I think civil society organizations will have to work in tandem with the state institutions. For example, in the anti-human trafficking units in India, it's mandatory to have an NGO partner. It's absolutely essential, because when a victim comes to an AHTU, they have to have the support of an NGO to say, where do we keep the victim? They can't keep a victim in the police station, right? They have to have a place to put the person, a care center, a support center, an assessment center, and those are services provided by the NGO who are called into play. Similarly, when you go to a one-stop service center, which is for gender-based violence of any kind, the civil society again is a critical partner in being able to build the capacity of the one-stop service center staff, plus being the support to the victim in gathering testimony, in training the police or training the health worker to gather testimony. So to me, there really is no way that I think gender-based violence is something that only state institutions can effectively address. It's just going to be impossible. And I think where we have reached today in all our countries is because the non-state actors have played a very critical role in moving this issue to the forefront and getting our policymakers, parliamentarians, judiciary take due cognizance of it and act effectively on that.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that. By decentralizing as I agree with you, we have NGOs and we have civil society organizations working in tandem with the government. But I feel when we were talking to some of the stakeholders in different states, what we understood is one-stop centers, in some states, they work with the NGO partners, but in some states, it's a state machinery itself that is working. And also regarding say decentralization, there is another model also. If you have heard about Kudumbashri in Kerala, they have an initiative called Snehida. So it is a women community which is helping. Probably they are doing the vulnerability mapping. They're identifying the unsafe spaces in their community, reporting it back to their senior. I mean, reporting it back to the village committee. Then it goes up to the taluk level. So that's how it functions. So they take that information from the grassroots to build better policies and a better way of compacting the issues. So I think it's both institutionalized in some state systems, like what I said in the Snehida, where they take the help of the grassroots level communities, they train the people there. But at the same time, they also have some NGOs coming into picture when they run some of these schemes as well. I think in Telangana, so we met some NGOs who are running the one-stop centers. And it was great to know because in tribal areas, again, this is a social issue, right? So we have to get to the society to find the issues, help them. So they actually reached out to an NGO working in the tribal area to run the one-stop center, rather than the state machinery coming in and recruiting people for them, for the one-stop center. So I think there are two ways. I could find two different ways of working when it comes to these systems that are already in place. So that's why I use the term decentralization, like how we can probably work around from either of the two.
I think to me it will be more, Anu Maria, I would say let's look at the process of how do you coordinate the services of two different positioned entities, state and non-state, to deliver. Because I think if you say let's decentralize, I don't want the state to believe that we are absolving them of their role and responsibility to actually provide the governance and care that they need to for their citizenry who have voted for them. So I think that's where it becomes important to stay. Your non-state player becomes a critical partner to support the state in its role of protection of its citizenry against everything, and that's where, whether a one-stop center is run by the NGO, yes, absolutely, I agree, it's a great way to look at it. Not every state can do it, but it has to be within the resources that the state provides.
Yes.
You can't expect the NGO to fund their own funds to run a one-stop center.
Sure.
I think that will be absorption of the relegating your duties. So I think that's what I was trying to get into.
Yes,
right?
yes. Thank you for that clarification. So maybe we'll come to the last set of questions, which is providing solutions. So I would like to hear from both of you, maybe if what we could think of to improve the existing system, how to strengthen the existing institutions. We are all agreeing on the fact that the laws are quite good. We have institutions in place. We have both NGOs working. We have the state machinery. So, but there are some gaps, like when it comes to, like you said, there are human resource gaps, there is a funding gaps. We have also coordination problems as well. So what could be some of the possible solutions? I think we'll start with Shamita,
ma'am. There of course are so many, and I by the way, Nandita has said something so important, and I want to emphasize it again, that we cannot absolve the state of its responsibilities for equal safety and protection to all citizens, not just one or the other. So I really appreciate that that statement. Thank you, Nandita, for bringing it up. Well, the solutions, of course, are to have to hold state accountable, to provide not only funding but also support, also awareness, high level of awareness among its players within it. So, which means that you have to have mandatory training for everybody, and not just once, but recurrent training. You have to provide protection for CBOs, non-governmental agencies, to work, to act free of fear, free of persecution, in the community and to provide women what they want. I mean, I know that many of the women, and there are difficulties, by the way, in our community, in South Asian community in the US, many of the women won't call the police or won't go to institutions because there are these huge gaps in finances. Maybe they are completely dependent on the abuser for finances, for immigration status, for childcare, for many other things, language. Many of the women who are here, or many of the people who are here, don't speak English that fluently. So there are all of these gaps that stop people from going to the institution straight right away or straight there. And these are gaps that have to be fulfilled. And because I work in the community very deeply and have been doing that, I know those gaps are not being addressed as completely or as comprehensively as it could have been. And one other thing that has happened, and I think that's a big issue in the US, is, and it's an important one, by the way. I'm not saying that we should not do it, but there's so much emphasis put on criminalization of the abuser and punishment of the abuser, which I think it should be, by the way. It's not that I'm saying that it should not be, it should be. But because the funding, the energy has gone towards that mainly, we have neglected to support and train and prepare the community. And remember that the people who are being abused are the women who are being abused. Gender-based violence is happening in the community. The survivors, maybe they can be taken out of the community for a while to address their needs, but they will be going back to the community. So the community is the nest where all of this is going to happen, are happening now, has happened in the past, and going to happen in the future. That community has to be changed deeply. And I think unless we do that, unless we put as much effort in preparing and developing the community as we do towards the institutions, which are, by the way, extremely important, but we have to put emphasis on both sides, equal, perhaps even a little more on the community to prepare it, and holding the community accountable. When someone is being, we completely talk about holding the state accountable, and I completely agree with Nandita on this. But at the same time, we have to hold the community accountable for the abuse that they are tolerating. And I think if we can do both of these at the same time, and there is no reason why we shouldn't be, I think we may be moving towards a solution.
Thank you for that, ma'am. So what is your take on this, Nandita? So do you think the funds are going too much into the criminalization part, or how should we plan it further?
I think I really agree with Shamita. I think it's a two-way, actually, a three-way street. I think a lot of the prevention part of gender-based violence rests on our ability to work and change the behavioral patterns within community, and going from the community to the household to the community and outward. I think that circle needs to be expanded and invested more in, so that we are able to break that acceptance to violence that is so prevalent, and the chuppi, as in Hindi you call the silence on violence that exists. I think we have to break that, and that is something that where more investment in community is absolutely essential. The second part is the protection part, in which I think there is really more to be done on shared responsibility between state and non-state, because the protection part is where the state has to play a role in providing the necessary institutional systems, and the civil society has the role of providing the services that are needed alongside the state. So that probably needs much more nuanced care. And frankly, I think I've been thinking what is also missing is nuanced understanding and nuanced response to violence based on age and socioeconomic classification.
Yeah.
We don't have that. A child will require a very different response from the police, a minor, versus maybe an adult woman, versus a woman from a marginalized community, a tribal woman, versus a woman who is probably being trafficked from another country into a third country, so a non-national. So I think that nuanced response mechanism does not exist at this point, and that needs to be absolutely strengthened. The third part is really the prosecution part of it, and I think there again, a lot has been done, and a lot has been done because the states have strengthened the laws. The laws have been strengthened because civil society played a role in talking and advocating about it. Other players have played a role. There are systems in place, for example, the State Legal Aid Council. But what is missing, I think the big part that I have seen largely in my years of work in this is that what is the level of priority these systems are giving to gender-based violence. So if there is a case of domestic violence versus a case of arson or murder, what's the police station going to act on first? What is the, and what makes him believe that this is a better priority versus that, or why are those two not equal priorities? So I think in the prosecution system, even whether it's a court of law, why is a state legal aid lawyer does not think that representing a victim is a big, is an important part of a law legal system? Why is it that only the least equipped legal people are there, or people who are not necessarily getting the right cases? So again, that's an unfortunate state of affair to have, that your state legal aid is being manned or managed by people who don't see this as a critical priority legal action needed. So I think unless we change some of that and say, for every police officer, the number of cases that you crack on, related to gender-based violence is going to have an impact on how you move forward in your career. For every legal aid lawyer, these cases are going to play a role in your professional trajectory because it's a priority. Just putting a system without making the issue that the system is addressing a core priority of the state will not address the issue completely. So I think for me, that's the other part of the protection bit. But I think I would give equal weightage to all of it, but they all need certain tweaks and changes for them to become an effective chain to address, the whole issue, starting from the community mindset, protection mechanisms, involvement of stakeholders, and prioritization of the issue at different levels.
Thank you for that, ma'am. I think that was a good summary of what we discussed so far. And out of all that you have just told, I think shared responsibility is something that is one key takeaway that I would take across all this: prevention, protection, and prosecution. I think we have to have that shared responsibility. Thank you for that. I think we are running out of time, but there is one question. If you have some time to just take up that question, I think we'll just stick to that one question. So somebody, Jayaraj, the question is, India does have GBV. Still married couples stay together much longer than in USA. What are the reasons? Do income and culture bear a fact on GBV? That is a question. I think either of you can answer.
Do you want me to respond to it?
You can go ahead and answer that, please.
I'm sure Nandita has equal.
Shamita, go ahead, and maybe if there's anything I can add.
Okay, sure. Absolutely. Culture has an enormous effect on, when and how we respond to violence, intimate partner violence, particularly. It's tremendous. I know, I've been working for 40 years in this space. And one of the first things that women come to, and particularly immigrant women, and immigration has its own effect, by the way. It has a siege mentality also. So they hang on to something that was there some time ago. But many of them would come to our organization. I've heard it many times. In my culture, this cannot be done. In my culture. And what would that means I mean, the first step she has already taken, right? She's come to me, come to the organization. So she has broken that, but she cannot stand it anymore in my culture. Immigrants always end up saying, okay, I cannot make a decision whether talking to my parents in India or Bangladesh or wherever that might be. And often the instructions from the parents are just kind of continue with it, in Bengali it's called manalo, or Hindi might be manalo, thoda sa, maybe, if you have a child, it's going to change. Maybe if you have if you just do whatever he wants, it's going to change. It doesn't. But the fact remains that there is tremendous amount of pressure from the family to stay within that marriage, to keep the marriage intact. And part of why marriages last so long, even when it has basically broken down internally, is because of the social pressure to keep it intact, to keep it going. And once those pressures are taken away, I have a feeling it's going to be like, like anybody, any community that says, it's okay. There's no reason why you should have to live with violence forever. And that is one thing that we have always said, you may be doing many things and we would support you in doing many things. There's no reason for you to live with violence.
Okay. Nandita ma'am, you have something to add?
Two things, I think, totally agreeing there. I think social and social cultural norms play a big role in choices women make and choices men make. But I also think that in our part of the world, in South Asia, there is a much larger stigma placed on the woman if she walks out of a marriage, which is not so much the case in the Western world. The stigma of having walked out of a marriage, either for violence or for any other reason, is much less out there. More because I think there has been a much more acceptance of the fact that women and men can move away if they are not. That is not to say that I'm perpetuating that we should go and just ask people to just get out from relationships. But I think when a relationship is toxic and it's violent, it becomes important to take stands. The other thing that is inhibiting women is, where will she find the next shelter if she walks out of the house? Because clearly she's married in South Asia and in her husband's family or home, right? Which is less of a case in the US and others, where you are nuclear homes. You could actually stake claim to the home you are in, or you will get social security. None of those options largely exist in South Asia for women. And I think not having that protection, the moment she decides to step out, forces a lot of women to stay back. The third and final is the whole battle on custody, which is extremely skewed. If you have children, it becomes even worse, and that pressure that what kind of a mother you are to leave your child behind, so almost it's like your duty. So I think those become the challenges. I feel it's a combination of what your social and cultural beliefs are, but it is also the fact that even with this social cultural beliefs, if there were apparatuses and mechanisms to make a woman believe that she will be taken care of by the state, if she chooses to, till the issue is resolved, any which ways, she will take decisions that is right for her. In the absence of that, she's going to continue to stay where she is.
Thank you.
I also want to add one thing more, Anu, is that this is not an easy decision. Leaving a marriage is not an easy decision for any community. The degree may be a little bit different because of the financial support she may have or an opportunity that she may have. But it's not an easy decision, to take the children away from the father or take the children away from the family, to find adequate finances, adequate shelter, all of that. These are very important issues in the U.S. as well, in the larger community. And I work with both communities, South Asian as well as the larger community, and it is always a wrench. It is always painful, difficult.
Yeah.
And so it's not as though they do it, at the drop of a hat.
Yeah. So thank you. I think we have come to the end of the discussion, and it was a very fruitful discussion. All the three panelists contributed immensely to the conversation discussions. It was informative. So I take a lot of things out of the conversations. So with this, I'm handing over this to Eliza. She will conclude. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anu, and thank you, speakers, for such an informative and thought-provoking discussion. I'm certain that the audience, as well as I, we have several key takeaways from today's discussion. As mentioned by Ms. Flavia, we have enough laws for GBV. However, they need to be a lot more women-friendly, women and child-friendly. The legal system is very daunting and frightening. Though the law mandates for women-friendly courtrooms, women-friendly lawyers, we don't really have them implemented on ground. The high judicial standards for evidence often results in women being unfairly labeled as liars. The major gap is that there is no adequate support for women to negotiate the legal system, which is where organizations such as Majlis comes into play. Even though we have an elaborate definition of domestic violence and sexual violence within the law, the definition has not trickled down to the people in order for them to understand what's happening to them. And as mentioned by Ms. Shamita, we do have community-based agencies which come into play for supporting women and children in gaining justice and safety, especially those belonging to certain communities such as the Black community, the First Nation community, and immigrant communities within the US that are generally reluctant to call the law enforcement. As Ms. Shamita mentioned, they require training, recurring training for promoting gender sensitization. And they would also have to hold the communities accountable for their actions, for the actions of the individuals belonging to the communities. As mentioned by Ms. Nandita, it is important to understand that trafficking initially begins within the country and then moves on to cross-border. And identifying this link is key to tackling the root cause of the huge issue of sex trafficking. Many trafficked women are generally misclassified as illegal migrants, hence preventing the correct legal and rehabilitative actions from being taken. Women and children are generally lured to trafficking for marriages, job opportunities, etc. However, these needs that are used for luring are not being noted or dealt by the law effectively. Also, as Ms. Nandita had mentioned, it is essential for NGOs to work in partnership with the government for providing capacity building, shelter, trainings, etc. However, we shouldn't absolve the state from its responsibilities of ensuring safety of its citizens. Further, as Ms. Nandita mentioned, we also require nuanced responses based on age, community, race, economic status, etc. So CPPR extends our gratitude to Ms. Jean and USCG Chennai for always being enthusiastic towards such initiatives that advances women's rights and supporting us, and for supporting us in this project of countering GBV. I thank the CPPR team that facilitated this webinar. And last but never the least, I thank the audience for participating in our discussion for the day. Keep following our social media for more updates on our efforts to strengthen the institutional mechanisms that are countering and combating gender-based violence in India. With this, I conclude our webinar. Thank you and wishing each of you a very lovely evening.
Thank you. Thank you. And lovely hearing you, Shamita. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Shamita ma'am. Thank you, Nandita ma'am. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Jean.
Thank you all.
Thank
Bye.
you.